Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here on the channel. And the 2026 draft is over now. It's not quite over, it's 2 p.m. Eastern here, but we're in the late hundreds, and I'm going to go through what teams did in the first and second round, which are the picks that really matter, the trades that happened. It was a really exciting draft, and I had a lot of fun covering it and seeing these prospects that I watched this year get drafted. And yeah, it's going to be a really interesting exercise in a few years to see how this ages. But yeah, here are my thoughts on the draft right now. And we're just going to get right into it with the first overall pick, Gavin McKenna. Pretty obvious at this point. And yeah, he's going to be a great fit there. We all knew that was happening. Stenberg at 2, we all knew was happening as well. I think at this point there was definitely some smoke, but Mike Greer even said that Stenberg was number 1 on their boards for a long time. So yeah, great pick here as well, and obviously he's going to fit in really well probably next year in the NHL with Celebrini and the rest of the Sharks. And yeah, first of many great picks for the Sharks, spoiler alert. Third overall is where we had Vancouver take Caleb Malhotra. This has been a pick that was mocked by many people and is a very interesting pick because, first of all, in terms of the actual player, he's not my favorite player in the draft, but I can definitely see what you see in him as a number 1 center of the future, hopefully. Do I think he's, going to be the best forward on a Stanley Cup winning team? Probably not. And do I think he's the best player at this position to be a franchise cornerstone? No, I would have taken one of the defensemen here. But I think it's still a good pick for the player. The other thing for me is the drama. Vancouver has just been a team that has had so much drama in the 2020s, and I feel like you're just inviting more with this pick. Of course, having the coach there, but I don't think it's necessarily a horrible pick at all. And yeah, the forward is definitely the more exciting pick. So yeah, Vancouver gets himself the best center on the board, in their opinion. At number 4, this is where we had our first big shock of the draft with the Buffalo pick, and I thought they might trade it. I knew Kekalainen was going to do something off the board here. He's such an unpredictable guy who's willing to take swings. I thought it would be with a trade, but he takes the pick and he takes Daxon Rudolph from Prince Albert, and I am not that high on Daxon Rudolph, I will admit. I can still see a good player there for sure. A guy with a good skating, pretty big, good shot, and he runs a power play really well, which is where so many of his points came from in the WHL. I just don't see too much, potential to be number 1 defenseman there for me. I don't think he's super smart in his defensive zone for sure. I think he needs to pick his spots way better. He can be physical, but he's way out of position to make those big hits when he does make them, I find. Needs to defend the rush a little bit better. And in the offensive zone, he can drive the play on the rush sometimes, but I also, sometimes I don't think he makes the right decisions. So this is a player that takes a lot of seasoning, but definitely a guy with potential, Evan Bouchard type potential maybe, if he goes best case scenario. And I think Buffalo's an interesting fit though, because they have, Dahlin and Power there already running the power play. To me, Rudolph made more sense for a team that maybe didn't need a number 1 defenseman, but could use a guy who could step in on the power play and play a middle pairing role. Like, I thought Nashville would be a really good fit for him. I thought Winnipeg could be a good fit. So going to Buffalo, I don't know. It's interesting. I do think there's definitely some solid upside there. So we'll see how the pick ages. And then 5 to the Rangers, Albert Smits is pretty funny. I'm glad he went here because I was a bit scared. The Flames were going to take him at 6th overall. I don't think it's a terrible pick, though. He's a good skater, obviously. I don't think you're getting a top pair guy in Albert Smits, but maybe a guy who could play in the NHL next year. And as we saw with the trade, the Rangers might be, really trying to rush themselves out of this little retool by trading for Pavel Dorofeyev, which is a very interesting trade. They gave up a first this year, which was what, 26th overall? Yeah, 26th overall. A future first and I believe a third. And then they signed him to a 7-year deal at $11 million. Now, in terms of the goal scorer you're getting there, yeah, that's the price you have to pay for, a consistent 35 goal scorer. The thing with me for Dorofeyev is I don't know if I see a guy who will thrive in a different system. Like, who's going to pass Dorofeyev the puck in New York? Like JT Miller. To me, I was a little bit scared of Dorofeyev as an offer sheet or an acquisition for many other teams because I feel like he's a very systematic player in Vegas. Vegas is a place where he can just thrive. It's the perfect situation for him. I could see him working well in like a place like New Jersey where he's got Jack Hughes to feed him the puck, but he's a winger who doesn't really go get the puck either. He doesn't go get the puck for his center. He's not really in there in deep on the boards. He's a great finisher, obviously. When he gets the puck, he does great things with it, but I'm a little worried about how he'll play in the New York Rangers system, and I also don't think they should be rushing out of this little retool this quickly. But, for that acquisition price, it's pretty good. 2 first-round picks and a third. We saw what other players were getting traded for today, which we'll get into later. But it's an interesting swing for the Rangers for sure. At number 6, my team, the Flames, take Carson Karels, and I was hoping for Viggo Bjork here, but this was the second best case scenario for sure. Big left-handed defenseman who I think plays both sides of the ice very well. Definitely needs to improve, kind of like Rudolph. He doesn't pick his spots great all the time. I think he definitely has higher defensive upside than Rudolph, and I think there's some untapped offensive upside there as well. But you also heard Craig Conroy talk in the interview after. This guy who could be the future captain of the Flames. So I really like this pick. I think this is really solidifies our defense for the future. Our forwards look all awful, but yeah, our defense looks fantastic for the future. And then Chase Reed falls to the Seattle Kraken at 7th overall. And this is the guy who I thought was the best defenseman in the draft, and I think a lot of people agreed. So this is best case scenario for Seattle. And they get a guy here who is probably going to run their power play for the future for sure, but also has that potential to be their number 1D and a superstar number 1D at that. And that is what Seattle needs. They need superstars. They need those game-changing talents. And Chase Reed is probably the third most game-changing talent in this draft behind the top 2. So I think Seattle had a great pick here. Viggo Bjork goes to Winnipeg at 8th overall, and this is a good fit for him. Even though I'm so high on Viggo and I think he could be a star player, he can also be a really good complementary player in Winnipeg. I hope he doesn't get buried in the AHL like they do to many of their prospects. But I feel like Bjork, this is kind of generalization, but as a Swede, as a little hardworking kid, I don't think he's going to be a guy who asks out of Winnipeg in the future. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is a really good fit for Winnipeg, and they got a great player here. And then San Jose, 9th overall, gets Keaton Verhoff. I am just so scared of the Sharks in the future, and I think they're going to run the Pacific, they're going to run the West, and you can lock them into every Stanley Cup final for the next 15 years, man. Because this is a terrifying team they're building. Chase Reed, I had as the best defenseman in the class. I didn't think Keaton Verhoff was that far behind him, and I think Keaton Verhoff maybe even has a higher ceiling to be that number 1 franchise-changing defenseman. He could also, he definitely has some kinks to work out in his game, being, I think the skating is, really gets hated on. It's not that bad, but he can improve in that. But this is a player who I think is really smart and brings really game-breaking potential. So if he turns into a number 1 right-handed defenseman, it's over. So 2 picks in the top 10, and there's a very solid chance that the Sharks could get the best forward in the draft in Stenberg and the best defenseman in the draft in Verhoff. That's terrifying. But anyways, Nashville at number 10. I don't like a lot of things about the Nashville organization, the way they're run their actual hockey on the ice right now. But I really like their draft picks, man. I'm a big fan of Wyatt Cullen. This is a guy with some star potential. And, he had some injuries this year, but I think by the end of the year, he was really starting to prove himself as a guy who could really push the pace as a forward who drives his own line. This guy with a lot of scoring potential off the rush. And I think, a fairly well-rounded game in the future. I definitely see potential for a very solid top 6 winger here who could, be a complement to your best players, be a guy who can drive play if needed. This is a guy with all the potential in the world, and this is a great pick. I also think Tynan Lawrence to St. Louis at 11 is a great pick. St. Louis did some other stuff today I'm not a fan of, but this pick is good. I think Lawrence still brings 1C potential, maybe not as high as we thought it was, but this is a guy who was ripping up the USHL, and I think once he started to get his footing in the NCAA, the season was over, so he didn't really get to show what he was capable of. We'll see next year what he does, but I think this is a guy who still could be a playmaking low-end number 1 center, and definitely, a solid second-line center in the future for the St. Louis Blues. At 12 here it was Alexander Command, and this is a guy who I knew was going to go high. I had actually I posted on Twitter as well, but I had a little like mock draft who I thought was going to go, and I had it printed out and was marking off all the right picks. I got 3 right, pretty sad, but I feel like I had the order right a lot of the time. I just had, Rudolph really screwed some things up for me. I had like 6 to 10 pretty close to correct, I feel like. But anyways, Alexander Command to the Devils at 12, and he was a guy who I don't hate. I think he doesn't bring any real top 6 offensive potential, I don't think. But you never know. He definitely showed some flashes this year, and he's a pest out there. He's pretty well-rounded two-way guy. He's very hardworking with a very solid frame and isn't afraid to use it. So it's an interesting pick for sure. And Sonny Meta, I think he's a guy who wouldn't take a swing on a third-line center. He clearly sees upside in this guy. So I'm curious to see how he turns out for them. Malte Gustafsson at 13th to the Islanders. This was a pick I'm a huge fan of. I saw a lot of people not really liking it because he's another left-handed defenseman, but I feel like this is a guy you build around, man. He's 6'4" and an incredibly smooth skater, was 17 for most of his draft year, playing against men and defending extremely well against men. He's going to be so solid defensively, and I also think there's some really good offensive potential there. He's a very solid puck mover, and he's not going to be a top power play defenseman, but I think this is a guy who could even have, top pair potential if he's in the right situation. And yeah, I think this is a guy who you trade out an Adam Pelech or an Alex Romanov to make room for on your defense because he is that talented. Oscar Hemming at 14th to Columbus. This is a pick. That was the 3rd pick I predicted. I got the top 2 right in this one. Pretty awesome. But Hemming is an interesting player. We didn't really see too much of him this year because of, the fiasco with the leagues he was trying to play in. Ended the year with Boston College, and I think this guy brings some untapped potential. We just don't really know what he's going to be at the NHL level. But a big winger with some speed, could maybe even play center at the end of the day in the NHL, honestly. And yeah, we'll see what we have out of Hemming. We're not really sure what the potential could be there, but brings a well-rounded game for now. Klepov, this pick went to Anaheim, and this was the Mason McTavish trade, by the way. 15 and 29 to Anaheim for Mason McTavish, and I'm not going to lie, this is pretty rough for St. Louis, in my opinion. McTavish is not a guy I'm very high on, being, a pretty slow skater. I don't think he's incredibly smart in the offensive zone. He can create offense in the right situation, and maybe that's the right situation in St. Louis, but I just don't see too much, upside there. And I think, he was getting scratched on the Anaheim Ducks this year. He didn't play much in the playoffs. He didn't play a big role. Under a different coach, I could be proven totally wrong, but I don't see him being more than like a 50-point guy, even in a right situation. But anyways, Anaheim apparently really loved Klepov, and they had made the McTavish deal, but were only going to go through with it if Klepov was still on the board, and he is. And this is a really good pick as well. This is a guy who I said in my last video, but he's one of those players where it feels like he has eyes on the back of his head. And very talented player, led the OHL in points. And yeah, very good playmaker. I think this is a guy who could be a top 6 winger for you if he rounds out his game. Obviously, a long way to go in the physical department, in the defensive department, but definitely a guy with big boom potential. Maddox Dagenet to St. Louis at 16. They have a lot of centers in their system now. They're keeping Robert Thomas, Tynan Lawrence they drafted. They have Mason McTavish now, Dalibor Dvorsky, and now Dagenet. Maybe they see Dagenet as more of a winger. This is a guy where I think there's a lot more potential there than we see. 6'4", and was starting to find his footing in the queue this year. Near the end of the year, I think he started to look a little bit more comfortable, because he still feels like he doesn't know how big he is yet, being, 6'4", but he hasn't filled out that frame completely. He doesn't use it to his full advantage. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. And I'm not sure what he really projects to be at the NHL level, but there could definitely be some potential there. Utah at 17 traded up for this pick, and we'll go through the Peterka trade now as well. 2 first-round picks for JJ Peterka. The sticker shock was definitely there. I was like, 2 first-round picks for this guy. That's egregious. It ended up being the 23rd overall pick. Yeah, 23rd, and then 2028 Florida pick, top 10 protected. And I feel like that's a pretty decent deal for both sides. Peterka wasn't really working out in Utah, and I think they're going to use some assets to go for a bigger swing maybe. But yeah, for Boston, this is a guy who is a good top 6 winger for you. Hopefully he can find some chemistry in the top 6. He's not a center, unfortunately, but still young, walked up on a good deal, and definitely has another level to get to. So I like it for both sides, I think, after, sitting with it a bit more. But Ethan Belchat's at 17. Belchat's was not a player I was a big fan of, but at this range, I could definitely see it. I didn't think he should be a top 10 pick or even like top 13. I didn't really think that would be a good pick. But here you're getting good value, and I think Utah's a really good fit for him as well, being, that huge winger with some decent skating. And I think once he can grow his physicality a bit more, can become a little bit more well-rounded, he could be an excellent complement player in that middle or even top 6 for the Utah. And Utah has a pretty small top 6. Guys like Cooley, Ginther, Keller, pretty small, so adding Belchatz is huge for them. Oliver Suvanto to Washington is interesting. This is a guy who I don't think he has a ton of upside, past being about a third-line player, but he's big and uses his frame fairly well, a decent skater, and yeah, very well-rounded, very defensive-minded player, and probably will be an NHLer for you, and Washington has been a good scouter of that type of talent. They just have so many forward prospects right now. I feel like even with some of the trades they made, they still need to make room in their bottom 6 for these guys or trade them for, some defensemen. It'll be interesting to see how Washington manages their situation, but this is a good value pick here. This is a player that, was definitely looked at as a potential lottery pick and teams will value in trades. Elton Hermansen at 19 surprised me to Los Angeles. I was definitely thinking they were going to go with, one of the bigger centers like Dagenais or Rogowski. I didn't expect them to take a high upside swing like this, but I really like it. Hermansen, extremely talented player, an extremely talented winger. He's a guy who I kind of compared to Adrian Kempe in some ways. And, incredibly good hands and a really solid goal scorer and just, all-around offensive talent. Obviously has a lot of well-rounding to do in his game and, attitude issues, I don't really know what to make of those. Defensive effort is definitely a problem with him, but I still think his talent was very much worthy of a top 20 pick, so I'm glad a team took a swing. Ilya Morozov at 20 is a very solid pick here as well. He doesn't have a ton of upside, I don't think, but he's been in North America for a few years despite being Russian. Incredibly strong player and physically mature, and you're getting a great defensive third liner here, probably a center at the next level as well, which is good for Buffalo. And yeah, he's going to be a player who I think could even be a fan favorite if he decides to bring a little bit more excitement to his game, a little bit more flashy physicality other than just, being so well-rounded. He's an interesting project for sure, and I think maybe even has some untapped potential. The third San Jose pick of the first round, them trading up to 21, is hilarious with the Philadelphia Flyers, and they trade up and get Ryan Lynn. And I think it's over. Like I said, this guy is, a guy you can lock into your second pair for the future. Smaller, but incredibly talented and very, very smart and well-rounded defenseman here on Ryan Lynn, who does everything at a really high level. He skates at a high level. He thinks. He defends. He's got leadership. This is such a fantastic pick. And this is a guy who I think definitely should have gone in the top 16. I knew he probably wouldn't. Going to the Sharks is maybe worst case scenario for a Pacific fan like me, because there's no hope. We're just gonna lose to the Sharks in the second round for the next decade, and just gotta accept the fate. But yeah, great pick here, and that really locks down the right side of their defense. Kesselring, Lynn, Verhoff for now. That looks really great. Liam Ruck goes to Pittsburgh at 22. Really interesting that Pittsburgh, obviously in the second round, they got the other Ruck twin. Didn't even have to trade up for him, which is pretty nice. And yeah, I definitely had some reservations about the Ruck brothers, but I think Pittsburgh is a really good fit for them. You can put them on a line together. And yeah, their games have been pretty, well digested at this point. Liam being more of the net front presence, while Marcus is more of the setup guy. And yeah, I think this is a great pick for Pittsburgh. And yeah, a really interesting fit. Not someone who was really on my radar to get the brothers, but yeah, very interesting. Detroit gets 23. This one shocks me. I definitely heard Utah's name out there for Sebastian Kosa, but I didn't really think of it too much because they have Veljmelka, who I know you're not locking in as your, starter for the next 10 years or anything. But they also have Michael Hrabal, who's widely considered maybe the second best, maybe even best goalie prospect in hockey, who looks almost ready for the NHL now. and they trade the 23rd overall pick, like a middle of the first round pick for Kosa is so strange to me. I didn't really like this move. Maybe they just have him locked in as a backup, but Kosa's what, 23 now with one NHL game under his belt, and like it seems like such a strange fit. Good move for Detroit. I thought they were going to have to settle for like a second round pick from the Oilers. Getting a mid first round pick is fantastic. Hurlburt, I'm a little less sold on how they use that first round pick. I would have gone Mathis Preston here. I think he's a better player. Hurlburt is an interesting smaller forward for sure. He works pretty hard. He's got a great shot, great goal scoring instincts, and great offensive ability. He's a dynamic player. We'll see how he does in college. I think this is definitely a guy with a lot of upside. I don't hate it at all. I don't know if I really project him to be like a top 6 talent, because I feel like a lot of his rush that work a lot of his offense that works in the WHL isn't going to translate to the next level. But we'll see. He's a Michigan guy as well. A good fit there, maybe. Vancouver gets Adam Novotny at 24, and I got to say, I love Vancouver's draft here. Novotny is a great pick here. This is a guy who you could really be, a foundational piece of your franchise. Not a star player or anything, but a guy who even has the potential to be a top 6 winger, I think. A very good goal scorer, hardworking, well-rounded, brings some physicality. I think this is a great pick here. Jonas Lagerberg-Hohen to the Senators. Now, he was injured a lot of this season. Maybe they saw some untapped potential, but I don't know why you didn't just trade down from this pick, because I don't think most people had this guy, as a first-round pick at all. Intriguing player, I guess. We'll have to see what we get out of him, because I don't know what he's going to be at the NHL level. It's so hard to project him when we've seen so little of him. Gleb Pugachov to Montreal at 26 is a great pick. This is a guy who's going to be a fan favorite. I've compared him to Josh Anderson before with some higher upside, and I think this is a guy who you're going to love at the Bell Center for the next 15 years. Doesn't bring, any top 6 offensive potential. His highlights looked pretty good when they're showing on the Sportsnet. I was like, ooh, okay. But yeah, this is a guy who I don't think is going to bring top 6 potential at the next level, but a physical guy. He makes some huge hits once in a while, but I think he picks his spots fairly well. He uses his size, in a smart way as well in the defensive zone. And yeah, this is a guy who's going to be a fan favorite for you. Philadelphia trades down and then selects Maxim Sokolovsky at 27, and this is hilarious. This is the most Danny Briere pick ever. I was thinking maybe the Senators were going to go for him at 25, maybe the Bruins at 23, but this is hilarious. I just can't see how this guy's a first-round prospect. Like 11 points in the OHL this year, and he made some big hits, but you watch the highlights, he's out of position on every single one of those big hits, and it's like a last-ditch attempt. This guy fumbles the puck. He really doesn't have any puck-moving ability. He's not a good skater or anything. He's 6'7" and throws the body once in a while, but I would be pretty shocked to see this guy make the NHL, or maybe he does make the NHL and gets totally ripped apart, but yeah, can't say I like this pick in the slightest for Danny Briere, but I thought it was pretty funny because it's a very Flyers pick. Anaheim's draft was very interesting. I think they almost went too high upside. Like, Klopov is a good pick. Nordmark, I'm not as sold on. Extremely talented player, but there's just so many issues with almost zero defensive commitment, it seems like. Reported attitude issues. He's not well-rounded in the offensive zone either. I think he tries to play hero too much. Definitely some interesting talent here. So we'll see what we have. But again, I just don't know what the projection is at the next level. So I definitely don't hate the pick, though. I always like a high upside swing. Vegas traded into the first round with the Dorofeyev, and they take Juho Pipparainen here. I am wondering if they just took like the highest upside guy, or the highest value guy, like valued around the NHL, and they'll trade him later. But an interesting player here, a Finnish defenseman who plays a premium right-handed position and is already very mature and a very good shutdown guy. Jack Hextall to the Flames at 30. This was a pick I was hoping for. Not my first pick at 30, but I'm pretty happy we got him there. A hardworking guy, and very defensive, very responsible. And yeah, like I said, he works really hard. I think there's some untapped offensive potential there as well. This is a guy who could be a really solid middle sixer for you. And he is an American, but he seems like a Calgary boy to me. I don't know. His personality seems pretty cool. So I was really happy with this first round for the Flames. Nashville trades up to the Carolina pick to select Tommy Blyle, and again, I don't like Nashville's team. I really like their drafting. This is a great swing on upside here. I think it's pretty fair to have him over Villeneuve as well. Smaller defenseman, right-handed, and just brings insane offensive potential. He's so good on the rush, and a fairly smart player as well, although there's a ton of rounding out to do. This is a really great pick. And then Jackson Cover to the Senators at 32. We've heard the story here. And again, this is a guy where we just don't know his potential. We don't know what his upside is. So it's going to be really interesting. We'll try and go through them a little bit faster now. Am I missing a trade? I feel like I'm missing a trade. No, I don't think so. Rogowski of the first pick of the second round. Definitely an intriguing player. He's the 6'7" one, right? I sometimes get him confused with Dagenet. But yeah, he's the 6'7" one. We'll see what we have in here. But Villeneuve going right after, I think this could look bad in a few years. And yeah, but for Chicago's credit, trading the 4th overall pick, they still get a lot of upside in this draft. Villeneuve at 34 is a great pick. This is a guy who, we've seen the Lane Hudson comparisons. Is he going to be that? We'll see. But this is a guy with the upside to be that for sure. Ryan Rubrek right after, too. I was pretty surprised to see him go in the early second round because I thought teams would be so far away on him. But he's a guy with a lot of goal-scoring upside as well. So a very interesting pick here for Chicago. At 36, the Flames take Chase Harrington. This was not a guy who was really on my radar in this range. I was hoping we would, get one of the high-talented forwards who fell from the first round. A guy like Mathis Preston, Casey Mutrin I was looking at. Nicholas Arm Olsen I was really looking at. I thought that would be a great pick either at 30th or at one of these picks. Harrington's not terrible though. I feel like he's a similar build to Hextall. He's, a very hardworking and pretty fast bottom sixer who maybe I don't see too much offensive upside in. This is a guy who feels a lot like the Jacob Battaglia draft pick from a few years ago for the Flames. A guy who you pick in the second round who shows some intrigue, but your best case scenario here is probably a fourth liner. So I definitely didn't love this pick. It could have been worse here. Van Hannon is a guy I don't really rate to New Jersey. Mutrin to Seattle at 38 is a good pick. Pittsburgh getting the other Ruck brother. Florida getting Ignatavicius at 40. This is a guy who's going to be a great third liner for them. Aram Olsen to Vancouver. Great pick here as well. I really liked Vancouver's draft. Rogowski I'm a little bit iffy on, but Aram Olsen I think is one of the guys who, one of the few guys who has potential to score 30 goals in the NHL. Even though his chances of hitting that aren't particularly high. It's very interesting. The Flames taking Tobias Trejbal. I mispronounce his name, but the top goalie in this draft pretty easily. USHL goalie of the year. I don't know what to think about this pick, man, because Calgary, we don't really need the goalie prospects, I didn't think. In me, I'm of the opinion that the difference between a second-round goalie prospect and a fifth-round goalie prospect is so little that why would you take the swing? But if this is a guy they're really high on, I trust him. Sheilov to Colorado is a good high upside swing. Other than that, what other names stood out? I think Ryder Cali to Florida is a great pick as well. That's two fantastic fourth line, third line players for their future. Mathis Preston to Anaheim at 50, another high upside swing. This is one of my favorite players in the draft, though. I was really hoping the Flames would get him with one of our second round picks. Anaheim won with Jaden Kurtz with their 45th overall pick, who played in high school. Yeah, played a few games with the Chicago Steel this year as well. But yeah, interesting swing, I guess. I don't think I would have taken him in the draft at all, but in the second round, have at it. Other picks I liked, William Hackinson was a guy I didn't mind, and he goes to Carolina at 51, which feels like a good fit. He's going to be a very solid bottom pair defenseman. Brett Liskey is a good pick to Philadelphia. I like him way better than Sokolowski, that's for sure. This is a guy who I think brings some upside as well as a well-rounded game. Thomas Galvas, I was really surprised to see him go in the second round because he's a double overager at this point. If you watch the World Juniors, he's a Czech legend. And yeah, a very interesting player. I've seen him Gravite compared him to Jordan Spence today, and I thought that was a really good comparison. With the Flames' second pick, I know I focus on the Flames pick a lot, but I think they're very interesting. Alan Shekelaslamov. I'm horribly mispronounced that name. He's a guy who wasn't on my radar at all. Looking at him, he put up some good points and seems to have some good offensive ability. So it seems like a guy who's a very high upside, low floor, and might not ever, make it to the KHL even. So no clue what to think of this pick. So we'll see in a few years. Other picks I liked Rudolph Burns-Collins to the Edmonton Oilers at 58th. That's a guy who I think could work really well in their bottom six. Wiggo Sorensen is a very talented player who went to Carolina at 61. Ben McBeath is a great defensive ad for the Rangers. That's a kind of a guy who fits in a similar mold as Smits, as doesn't do anything particularly well, but is very solid and is a great skater for a defenseman. Into the third round, Calgary taking Joe Iginla at 65th is something, man. It's such a nepotism pick, obviously, but I would have rather seen us, take the swing in the 6th round when there were so many players I still liked on the board. I would have liked Zach Olson here and Adam Valentini, Thomas Sharenko. There's so many guys who have so much more potential, I think. So strange to go for this, nepotism pick. And it's not really appeasing the fans either. Like, you look on Twitter and people don't like this. Like, I don't know. And reported attitude issues with Joe as well. I don't know, man. I'm a big T. Iginla guy, not a big Joe Iginla guy. It's strange. I don't know. Maybe we're trying to get Tej over here. I'd love to see that. Hopefully he's the building block of our forward future. Samuel Alarli, who went one pick after to the Chicago Blackhawks, would have been a better pick for sure. I like him a lot. Finnish defenseman who I think brings some middle pair potential with his puck moving ability. Other picks in the third round, Ethan McKenzie is an overager, but he went to Toronto, and I think that's another good pick for Toronto, another smooth skating guy with some high defensive floor. Adam Nemec to Ottawa. Ottawa is such a strange drafting team because I'll love some of their picks, and some of them I just don't see any, validation there. Nemec is a high offensive guy. He could be very interesting. Zach Olson is another great pick to Toronto there as well. Mans Goodmanson is a pretty good pick in the third round as well. Thomas Sharenko, 81 to the Rangers, their first forward of the draft, and I think this is a really good swing on a guy who could score 20 goals in the NHL here. Adam Anderson is another great pick to Minnesota, a good center. And Pierce Bowie, I think it's Bowie you pronounce the last name, to Pittsburgh, a smaller guy but with so much drive, and once he fills out that frame, I think he could be a really great player. And yeah, so now we're kind of getting into the players, they're taking big swings. Adam Valentini I did want to talk about because he is a controversial player, was going to play for Kitchener but switched to college hockey at the last second. And he played in college hockey this entire year. How many points did he put up again? Yeah, with Michigan, had 27 points in 40 games. Like, not bad at all. Was playing more of a reduced role for sure, but still a very good player. And I think he brings, a decent amount of projectability in his physicality, in his effort to go to the defensive zone. This is a guy who I wouldn't have been mad if he was a first round pick. I knew he was probably going to drop more than that. But again, why aren't you taking this in the third round instead of the nepotism pick? I don't know. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's any players I'm particularly high on at this point in the draft. And yeah, I think that's it. I'm hoping we get some more trades in these next few days here. I hope we get a Jason Robertson trade. I hope we get Zach Werenski and Kirill Marchenko trades maybe. It's kind of interesting how the draft pick values work this year. Kent Hughes was talking a little bit about it in his interview. But it seems like there's so many teams looking to trade away their top 10 picks, but there's just no suitors that made sense to take them on. Like, Dallas would have gotten a top 10 pick for Jason Robertson, but they wouldn't want to keep it and draft a player there. They would want to flip it right away. And there's just no time to do that on draft day, it seems like. There's just not enough time to find suitors. So I still think we'll have a very exciting few days here. July 1st is always very exciting. And further into the summer, it'll quiet down, but I still think we'll get some big moves, some big trade requests, stuff like that. It's going to be very interesting, but yeah, it wasn't even a quiet draft day. Lots of big trades. Dorofeyev, very interested to see what Vegas will do. I got my eyes on Montreal to maybe be a big suitor for Marchenko and Werenski. That could be a great addition to so many teams, Sharks maybe. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for today. kind of my loose thoughts on the draft. We'll have more moves to react to before free agency on July 1st. On the 30th of June, I'll probably do, a little kind of like overview of what I think contracts will be handed out now that we're closer, and we still have some guys who might extend. We still have some guys who might be traded. So yeah, we'll talk to you on June 30th to get the free agency overview and any trades that have happened between now and then. But yeah, let me know down in the comments, what did your favorite team do at the draft this year? Do you like it? Do you not? What trades would you like to see in the future? Is there any guys who you think will be steals or busts in this draft? Let me know all of that down in the comments below. And yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one.